I had spent hours carefully picking out each gift, wrapping them with the tiniest ribbon, imagining the smiles and surprise on my family's faces. I told myself this time would be different. I stepped into the living room, heart pounding, hands shaking slightly, holding the neatly wrapped presents. I pictured laughter, warmth, maybe even a heartfelt thank you. But the moment I crossed the threshold, it all came crashing down. Cousins snickered behind their hands, my aunt's eyes narrowed with that familiar, dismissive glare, and someone muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Wow. You really went cheap this year, huh?" The words hit me like a cold wave. I froze, stunned, every carefully considered choice instantly dismissed. My chest tightened, embarrassment radiating through every nerve, as the room erupted in quiet laughter and whispered critiques. I wanted to explain that it wasn't about the money, the wrapping, or the brand. It was about thought, effort, and care. But the words stuck, trapped in my throat. The contrast was brutal. My anticipation, my hope, my small triumphs, smashed against their mockery. And yet, as I stood there, cheeks burning, a strange awareness flickered inside me, a quiet, simmering realization that they had no idea what they had overlooked, that appearances could be deceiving, and that this moment of humiliation was only the first act in a story that had yet to unfold. Family gatherings had always been a minefield for me, a place where favoritism and judgment lurked behind every smile. My cousins were praised for their achievements, my siblings for their charm, while I was often relegated to the background, my efforts overlooked or dismissed. Even simple gestures, like bringing homemade treats or helping set the table, were met with polite nods or fleeting acknowledgement, never real appreciation. Over the years, I had grown accustomed to feeling invisible, my successes minimized, my intentions questioned. I remembered birthdays when my gifts were compared unfavorably to others, and holidays when my contributions were laughed off as insignificant. These small humiliations accumulated quietly, each one a reminder that in this family, appearances mattered far more than heart or effort. Yet, despite the subtle cruelty, I had learned to observe, to notice patterns, to understand who valued authenticity and who thrived on superficial judgments. That awareness shaped how I approached every interaction, including choosing gifts. With limited means, I spent hours thinking, searching for something meaningful, something that would carry weight far beyond its price tag. I considered their tastes, their personalities, the little hints they dropped in casual conversations, and wrapped each item with care, imagining their surprise. It was a labor of love, a statement of thoughtfulness meant to speak louder than words. But the memory of being belittled, dismissed, and overlooked lingered in the back of my mind, like a shadow over every carefully wrapped package. It was this history that made the sting of today's mockery so sharp, the laughter so piercing. And yet, the very act of planning, observing, and preparing had quietly given me a kind of strength, a hidden resilience and strategic patience that none of them could see. Little did they know, the small gestures they mocked were only the surface of a plan they would never anticipate, a plan that would soon turn the tables entirely. I carefully placed the first gift on the table, my fingers lingering on the ribbon for a moment longer than necessary, as if that small pause could shield me from judgment. Almost immediately, a cousin snorted, glancing at the wrapping with exaggerated disdain. "Is that all?" they said, voice dripping with mockery. My aunt leaned over, eyes scanning the items, and added with a sigh, "I guess some people just don't know how to pick something decent." Laughter rippled through the room, quiet at first, then louder, like a wave I couldn't escape. I felt my chest tighten, heat rising in my face. Each comment cut sharper than the last. The whispers comparing my gifts to expensive store-bought alternatives, the smirks exchanged behind hands, the raised eyebrows that silently judged my worth. "Cheap," someone muttered, barely audible but perfectly clear. I wanted to explain, to defend myself, to say that it wasn't the price or the packaging that mattered, but the thought, the effort, the care I had poured into every choice. But the words stuck in my throat, swallowed by a growing sense of disbelief and hurt. And then something shifted. Anger began to simmer beneath the embarrassment, a quiet, focused spark that refused to be ignored. I realized the contrast between what they saw, simple wrapping, unassuming boxes, and what was actually inside. The injustice of being mocked for something they didn't understand ignited a determination I hadn't expected. The humiliation, the laughter, the underestimation, it all became fuel. In that moment, as they continued to snicker and whisper, I felt a plan begin to take shape in my mind, a way to turn this mockery on its head. I would show them, but not with anger, not with confrontation. I would let the truth reveal itself, and when it did, the shock would be theirs. The laughter didn't stop. If anything, it grew sharper, more deliberate, each comment a subtle jab aimed to remind me of my place, or rather, my supposed lack of one. My cousin whispered to another, loud enough for me to hear, comparing my gifts to the ones my brother had brought last year, noting how thoughtful and expensive his selections were. My aunt leaned back in her chair, smirking, as if to underline the contrast between me and everyone else she deemed worthy. I felt my stomach knot, the familiar sting of being overlooked gnawing at me, but this time, it didn't just hurt, it sparked something deeper. I watched them, silently observing the patterns of their condescension, the way they dismissed effort, the way they celebrated appearances over substance, the way they assumed I would always be the lesser one. I remembered every past gathering where I had been belittled, every small humiliation tucked quietly into my memory. Anger began to simmer beneath the surface, but it was a controlled anger, one that didn't flare into rash words or outbursts. Instead, it sharpened my mind, forcing me to think, to plan, to see opportunity where they only saw weakness. As I smiled politely, nodding to the compliments I didn't receive and hiding the hurt behind a calm exterior, I felt the contrast between my public composure and their shallow arrogance grow. They laughed, they whispered, they judged, but they had no idea how carefully I was taking note of every detail. Every smirk, every careless remark, every dismissive glance was being filed away, catalogued silently in my mind. In that tension-filled room, a quiet strategy began to form. I realized that I didn't need to compete with their arrogance or try to outshine them immediately. I could let them underestimate me, let them mock, let them continue believing they were in control, and when the moment was right, when I had the upper hand, the revelation would hit them like a storm. The anticipation of that moment, the thought of turning their mockery back on them, made the humiliation bearable, even potent. For the first time in years, I wasn't just enduring the judgment, I was preparing for it to be my greatest advantage. By the time dessert was served, I felt every ounce of patience I had carefully cultivated start to crack. Each laugh, each whisper, each glance that dismissed me as insignificant pressed down on my chest like a weight I could no longer ignore. I had always been the quiet one, the background figure who went unnoticed, underestimated, and undervalued. But now, after hours of subtle cruelty disguised as humor, I could feel a shift within me, a quiet, relentless fire igniting beneath the embarrassment. I remembered every time they had judged me superficially, my gifts dismissed, my achievements minimized, my intentions questioned. Every small incident, every careless remark had piled up over the years, and suddenly the cumulative weight of their arrogance became unbearable. I felt anger, yes, but it was no longer the raw, flailing anger of humiliation. It had sharpened into something colder, more deliberate. My weakness, my invisibility, had been a shield, a mask that hid my awareness and patience. Now that shield had transformed into resolve. As I sat there, smiling politely while my family continued their shallow critiques, I realized that the very thing they saw as my weakness, my quiet demeanor, my supposed inability to impress, was about to become my greatest strength. The contrast between their arrogance and my careful observation, between their superficial judgments and my hidden awareness, was stark. For the first time, I understood the truth. Humiliation could be a weapon if wielded with patience, and underestimation could be a power if quietly harnessed. In that moment, I knew that the tables were about to turn. What had begun as an evening of ridicule would soon become a stage for revelation, and the shock would be theirs. Not mine. When the laughter finally settled into murmurs, I took a deep breath and began to hand out the gifts one by one, keeping my voice calm, almost casual, as though the past mockery had no effect on me. I watched their faces carefully, noting the faint smirks and sideways glances as each package was unwrapped. The first one tore through the paper, revealing a sleek designer watch tucked inside its modest wrapping. The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Eyes widened, mouths opened, and the cousin who had earlier snorted in my direction froze mid-laugh. "Oh, I didn't realize," someone stammered, their tone faltering, unsure whether to laugh or apologize. I handed the next gift to my brother's favorite niece. As she opened it, a perfectly tailored cashmere scarf slipped out, soft and luxurious, the label barely visible beneath the folds. The whispers grew louder, not of mockery, but of disbelief. Heads turned, and suddenly the same relatives who had criticized my cheap choices were scrambling to mask their embarrassment, their pride wounded by the sharp reversal. Each gift followed the same pattern: understated packaging, but inside, carefully chosen, high-value treasures that revealed I had understood their tastes, desires, and secrets better than they had ever imagined. Jewelry, rare collectibles, designer accessories, every item reflected thoughtfulness, effort, and insight into who they were and what they valued most. The contrast was blinding. The mockers, once smug and superior, now floundered, their arrogance stripped away by the truth they had refused to see. I watched quietly as the realization settled in, savoring the shift. The humiliation they had inflicted upon me, the laughter that had pierced my heart, was now mirrored back in the form of awe, surprise, and quiet shame. Every glance I had catalogued, over the years, every moment of underestimation, every dismissal had been a step in a plan they had no idea existed. Their mockery had given me the perfect stage for revelation, and I had taken it with precision. In that moment, I understood that the power dynamic had shifted entirely. The family who had laughed at me now saw me not as the background figure, the easy target, or the underdog, but as the orchestrator, the one who had quietly prepared a reversal that none of them would ever forget. The tables had turned, and the room was filled not with laughter at my expense, but with shock, admiration, and an uncomfortable sense of their own error. The room was thick with tension as the last gift was unwrapped. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by shallow gasps and nervous laughter that quickly died under the weight of realization. Eyes darted around, searching for reassurance, for an escape from the embarrassment that now settled over them like a heavy curtain. The cousin who had mocked my cheap gifts earlier fidgeted, shifting from foot to foot, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't know," they muttered, voice trailing off as if words themselves were suddenly inadequate. My aunt cleared her throat, cheeks flushed, and attempted a half-hearted smile. "Well, I suppose I misjudged your taste," she said, though it sounded forced even to her own ears. The room collectively held its breath, the usual chatter replaced by the hum of stunned realization. I smiled faintly, deliberately composed, allowing my calm to contrast sharply with their flustered faces. Every ounce of confidence I projected emphasized the reversal of power. The one they had ridiculed was now entirely in control of the room's emotional energy. They scrambled subtly, trying to regain footing, but their previous arrogance had left them exposed. "I never thought," another cousin whispered, voice tinged with regret, glancing at the carefully selected gifts and finally understanding the thought and insight behind each one. The shift was palpable. Mockery had evaporated, replaced with disbelief, admiration, and the sting of their own error. I observed quietly, savoring the psychological upper hand. Every attempt at explanation or excuse fell flat. Their words lacked conviction because the truth was undeniable. I had remained composed, patient, and precise, letting their assumptions and arrogance lead them straight into this moment of reckoning. In that charged atmosphere, the humiliation they had aimed at me transformed into my empowerment. The laughter that had once cut through my confidence had been replaced by my quiet authority. The balance of respect had shifted entirely. They had underestimated me, mocked me, and now, faced with undeniable evidence of my foresight and understanding, they had no choice but to confront their own misjudgment. Justice had been served not with anger, but with precision, patience, and an unexpected reveal that left everyone in awe. The tables had turned completely, and the room felt the full weight of it. Slowly, the tension in the room began to shift. Some family members, still wide-eyed from the revelation, offered tentative apologies, their voices soft and unsure. I'm sorry, I didn't realize," my aunt murmured, her usual confidence replaced by a rare vulnerability. Others simply remained stunned, eyes fixed on me, mouths slightly open, unsure how to process the sudden reversal of roles. The smug superiority that had dominated the gathering moments before had evaporated, leaving only quiet introspection and the lingering weight of their misjudgment. I remained calm, letting their reactions unfold without interruption. There was no gloating, no condescension, only measured composure that underscored the contrast between their earlier arrogance and my newfound authority. Each apology, each hesitated glance, reinforced a simple truth. Respect is earned not through loud assertion, but through quiet patience, careful planning, and the courage to remain steadfast in the face of mockery. As the realization sank in, I felt a sense of empowerment that went beyond mere satisfaction. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong for the sake of revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, asserting my worth, and showing that thoughtful action and strategic patience could outweigh superficial judgments. I had turned humiliation into leverage, ridicule into revelation, and underestimation into authority. The room, once a theater of subtle cruelty, had transformed into a space where respect could finally take root. Some family members adjusted, their demeanor offering tentative nods of acknowledgement, while others simply absorbed the lesson silently, the sting of their assumptions lingering but tempered by the undeniable truth. In that moment, I understood that empowerment does not always require confrontation. Sometimes the quiet demonstration of intelligence, care, and foresight speaks louder than any argument, leaving a lasting impression that reshapes dynamics permanently. I had endured, observed, and waited, and now, at last, the balance had shifted. Sitting quietly after the gathering, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had unfolded. Years of subtle favoritism, quiet dismissal, and the constant pressure to measure up had left scars I barely acknowledged at the time. Yet those same experiences had shaped me, honed my patience, and sharpened my awareness. I realized that intelligence and insight are often underestimated when they come quietly, and that true strength doesn't always announce itself with loud gestures. The contrast between appearances and reality became clearer than ever. What they had seen as cheap or insignificant had concealed value they never considered. Every whispered laugh, every dismissive glance had been a clue I had quietly gathered and stored. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same family that mocked me now had to confront the depth of my thoughtfulness and planning. I understood then that personal power often lies in subtle influence, in observing before acting, and in letting others underestimate you until the right moment arrives. The humiliation I once felt had transformed into a quiet, enduring confidence, a reminder that being underestimated isn't a weakness. It can be the greatest advantage. In that reflection, I felt closure, empowerment, and the calm knowledge that respect, once earned, is impossible to take away. Looking back, I realized the lesson was never really about the gifts themselves. It was about how easily people judge based on appearances and overlook the thought, effort, and intelligence behind quiet actions. Humiliation can sting, and being underestimated can hurt. But those very experiences can also become the foundation for growth, strategy, and personal strength. Patience, observation, and subtle planning often carry more weight than the loud declarations of others. To anyone watching, remember this. The respect you deserve doesn't always come immediately, and the opinions of those who fail to see your worth are not the measure of your value. True empowerment comes from knowing your own strength, trusting your instincts, and letting actions speak louder than words. So I ask you, directly, have you ever been mocked or underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? Share your story, because sometimes the quietest victories are the most unforgettable. What would you do if this happened to you? Comment below. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for more. See you in the next video.